now for nearly a year, and you've spent a lot of time today saying that the problem's really derived from the former government. Our job is not...
The children didn't turn up under this government except for 350. 8,400 turned up under the previous government, Madam President, so I think that's a fair statement.
So you have been saying it repeatedly this morning.
Because it's true, Madam President.
Well, we're concerned not with the political blame, but we're trying to understand why these children are still in detention, and that raises a number of issues. But one that I want to focus on at the moment is, as you've said a few moments ago, 30,000 people in Australia are waiting to have their claim for refugee status to be assessed. In the year, or nearly a year, that you've been in power, my understanding is that those claims have not been assessed. Now, we, the public, have observed that in relation to the 157 Sri Lankan Tamils, Indians that have been picked up on a boat some weeks ago, it took, I think, 20 minutes to ask 4 fundamental questions in order to make a preliminary assessment that they were not refugees and should be possibly returned.
That's not what applied to those 157.
Okay,
I think you're confusing that with
all right, well then we
measure.
go back to the 41 that were on the earlier ship. So wherever this is taken...
I can't confirm what you said there, but I can say 4 questions is not right either.
Okay, well we have been given repeated evidence that 4 critical questions have been asked in a very short space of time. I can assure you what you've been given is not true. All right, well, as you have said earlier, we will assess these assertions and assess the extent to which they're true. But the point I'm trying to get to is that if you're able on a ship to ask 4 questions to assess whether or not somebody might be entitled to refugee status, why has it taken you nearly a year before you've even begun the assessment of the 30,000? And I ask this question very deliberately because one of the factors that underlies the concerns of asylum seekers across Australia and on Christmas Island is that one aspect of personal dignity, that they are refugees, has been stripped away from them. They haven't had an opportunity to put their case to you and to deny the allegation that they do not fit that legal standard. And what I'm trying to get to is why, and this affects the children, of course, so particularly, you have taken so long when you can demonstrate, apparently, some form of rapid assessment for those that you've picked up at sea.
Well, firstly, let me say that the 2 processes that you're talking about are completely different. The processes that are conducted in Australia are different to those that have applied elsewhere in the circumstances that you referred to. That aren't subject to the terms of reference of this inquiry. So let me address what's happening here in Australia. I covered this off in my
under our jurisdiction, and I am quite clear that that is part of our jurisdictional scope.
Well, we may disagree about that, Madam
do.
President, and
no, we definitely
that can just be stated. Yeah. But I'll address the issues of those who are in Australia and the 30,000. And at the risk of frustrating you, 23,000 of those 30,000 arrived after August of 2012. I think you became the president a month or so before that. In August of 2012, the government of the day, for reasons of its own, chose not to process anyone who turned up after that date all the way to the next election. So from August 2012 to September 2013, there were 23,000 people who came into that category, not subject to offshore processing, that were not processed. That is the caseload we were looking to address, including the balance who were being processed under between 3 or 4 other different systems that hadn't concluded, some of which were before courts and appeals tribunals and various other things. The policy we took to the election was to clear the legacy caseload with a rapid assessment process, because I agree. I think the faster you do it, the better. The quicker you can get to a decision, a yes or a no. Delays in processing is not a policy deterrence factor. It's a frustration to governments and those who are subject to the processes alike. It creates greater cost for the government. It's in the government's interest to want to be able to process people more effectively and efficiently, and that has always been my view. But that processing has to be undertaken in accordance with the policy framework that the government is seeking to implement. Now, immediately we moved to put temporary protection visas in place, and had they remained in place, then legislation would have been then quickly introduced that would enable us to get on with processing that caseload. and the thousands of people that are still in detention and those who have had to spend longer in detention than they would otherwise have had to, would have had their claims processed. And that would have started earlier this year. But the government was also not going to have its border protection policies compromised by its political opponents playing political games in the Senate.
Haven't you just said, Minister, that this is not a deterrence factor, to quote you?
Yeah, that's right.
So why would you not continue with the assessment?
Because I don't currently have a visa product, Madam President, that enables me to complete their process. And until I can have a visa product that completes that process, then I don't intend to commence it. And that is why I'm dealing with the crossbenchers in the Senate to ensure that the government is in position to deal with these issues and get processing underway. Now, that could have happened earlier. These people could have had their claims assessed, Madam President.
To give them a visa?
They could be living in the community on temporary protection visas with work rights and parity of benefits today. The reason they are not is because of the Labor Party and the Greens who blocked that measure in the Senate. I've waited for the new Senate to engage with, which I've been doing comprehensively now for some period of time, and that will go before the Senate, and I will then work with whatever decision comes out of the Senate. That is the nature of our political process, Madam President.
What product do you currently have?
Permanent visas, Madam President.
And you will not.
And that is not going to be provided to those who've come illegally by boat by this government.
Well,